Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the single thing that has changed the world the most? I bet you chose something like the smartphone, car, or maybe even electricity. But what if I told you that a rock that can be eaten, an edible rock, is far more important than all of these? Take a look around you. What do you see? A phone? Chairs? Trees? But what if I told you that this edible rock is in all of these things? Your phone, the chair in your room, the trees outside, and even in your own body. This edible rock has 4 letters. It starts with an S and ends with a T. It's salt. Now I know what you're thinking. How can salt possibly be more important than my phone, car, and even electricity? Well, if you think salt is only used to season your steak, then you're going to have your mind blown. Ever since ancient times, humans have had a strange obsession with salt. Abyssinia, or modern-day Ethiopia, has the custom of presenting a salt rock to a guest, who would then lick it. The Romans called the man in love Salix, which means in a salted state, and priests in ancient Egypt who were celibate would avoid eating salt because they thought it would incite sexual desire. But why? Psychologist Ernest Jones brought up the idea that the obsession with salt may have come from the observation that fish, living in the salty sea, have far more offspring than animals on land, and it was also believed for a long time that mice could reproduce just by being in salt, because ships carrying salt were usually overrun by mice. But how has this strange obsession with salt changed the world? How is it more important than the steam engine and the internet? And how is salt more destructive than a nuclear bomb? One of the earliest records of salt is in ancient China. Imagine for a moment. It's early in the morning. You woke up on the reed mat and it's time to work. It's the only way to feed your family, or else they would starve. So as a farmer, you head to the paddy fields. Hours after hours, you harvested rice under the blazing sun. Dad, look at this flower. A young girl, no older than 7, suddenly called out to you while holding a dandelion. Even though your hands were filled with calluses, your muscles were sore, and your skin was burnt from the blazing sun, just seeing her warmed your heart and made everything worth it. You were reminded of the very reason you were working in the first place, to protect your family. The sky turned dark and the sun set. It was time to return home. You could finally reunite with your family. As soon as you entered the small thatched hut, laughter and joy resounded in your ears. Although you led a humble life, maybe life isn't so bad after all. But good times didn't last long. Your worst nightmare turned into reality. Dad, I'm hungry. When can we eat? You heard a weak young girl's voice. You looked towards the source of the voice and saw your daughter. She was as thin as a skeleton on the brink of death. Just a little longer. Everything will get better soon, you replied. But that was a lie. You feared for the future yourself. When did it all go wrong? A drought struck. The paddy fields were destroyed, and you lost your only source of food and income. Without food, your family fell sick. Your 7-year-old daughter was starving. She lost her smile, and you lost the meaning of your life. Not only you, the entire village was starving, about to be wiped out. But what could you even do? The drought took away everything, the crops, animals nearby. There was no food left. Why? Why are the heavens so cruel? Do I not deserve to live a happy life? This was what living as a farmer in ancient China was like. It was filled with danger. Any drought or flood would lead to entire villages being wiped out, and these tragedies happened again and again, until a certain edible rock was found. In a region filled with dry yellow earth and desert mountains, there was a lake. When the lake's water evaporated in the summer sun, square crystals would form on the surface of the water, and when the nearby villages discovered these square crystals, the tides of change would envelop the world. But how could these mere salt crystals save countless lives? At first, people used it to preserve food. They would rub salt on meat and fish and leave it in the sun to dry, which would turn them into salted fish and jerky. People realized that salt could draw out moisture, making the food dry faster and prevent bacterial growth. Thus, situations where parents had to see their own children starve in front of them became less common. However, peace didn't last for long. Do you guys remember that meme with Bugs Bunny saying "ours"? Well, the entire situation can be summarized with this meme. After realizing how useful salt was, the government at the time started monopolizing it. They controlled the production of salt, deciding where and how it could be extracted. Private merchants were allowed to sell salt, but they had to pay an absurd amount of taxes. The government would then use the money to build up the military. Later on, Confucius and his followers would debate the morality of the government for choosing to control such an essential and life-saving resource. Some scholars believed that monopolizing salt was evil because it placed too much power in the hands of rulers, while others argued that controlling salt was the right decision, because it prevented greedy merchants from selling salt for absurd prices to make more money. However, if I were to describe the influence of salt so far, it would be less than 1% of its total influence. When you roll a snowball down a hill, it would get larger and larger, right? But this edible rock isn't just a regular snowball, it's a planet-sized one. Imagine for a moment. Under the blazing sun, all you see are mud houses, and beyond that is an endless desert, a desert that seems to touch the world border. But among the perpetual desert, there was a river. Alongside the bank of the river, there were countless peasants working, and you are one of them. Your family was poor, so ever since you came of age, you had no choice but to collect papyrus at the river to support your family. Such was the life of a peasant, but you despised such a life. Every day, your co-workers, the other peasants working alongside you, would perish one by one from hunger, thirst, overexertion. You didn't want to follow in their footsteps. Who knows when you'll be next? Luckily, your family had some knowledge in writing and religion, and one day a priest noticed your talent, so you became a temple scribe. This was a huge leap for someone with such a lowly background, because temples weren't just places of worship, they were also centers of administration. Days after days, you practiced unceasingly. The sleepless nights, the blood and sweat, they all paid off. You mastered the art of hieroglyphics and record keeping. So you started working under priests, helping them manage taxes. Time and time again, you proved your loyalty and usefulness. You were finally promoted to a high-ranking position. You could finally relax. But even after accomplishing everything you ever dreamed of, you didn't feel happiness nor sadness, only emptiness, like there was a void in your heart. You don't know when it started, but one day you started to have these heretical thoughts. You wanted to deny them, but they just kept growing deep within your heart. Ever since you were a child, everyone seemed to worship the gods. Your family taught you about the gods. You started off as a temple scribe, a job deeply connected with religion, and you achieved everything you wanted in life. Anyone would be thankful to the gods for that. But one day you started to have this blasphemous thought. You started doubting the gods. When you saw fellow peasants perishing by the river, their skin would blacken, the scent of decay would permeate through the air, and flies would gather in swarms. Everyone, your parents, teachers, friends, would often say that Osiris cared greatly for the dead, yet rot claims them before they can be honored. Not only peasants, high-ranking officials, and even the pharaoh would meet the same fate. It is said that the soul cannot journey to the afterlife if the body is lost. Without a proper burial, there is no eternity, only emptiness. So you started to have this heretical thoughts. What if the gods don't exist and religion is merely a front to mask our fear of death, to deny death itself? Ancient Egyptians believed that to reach the afterlife, one's body must be intact. However, how could one reach the afterlife if their bodies rotted? This went against their beliefs. That is, until a certain edible rock was found. One day, while venturing across the unending sand dunes, they found a mysterious valley. Instead of golden sand, what they saw was a land of white. The valley was filled with white rocks. They hadn't seen anything like this before, but it's human nature to be curious, to desire the truth. So they decided to take a risk and bring the white rocks back to the city, and curiosity killed the cat. But the truth brought it back to life. The gamble paid off. They first discovered that these mysterious white rocks could preserve food. By cleaning and gutting fish before salting them and drying them in the sun, the fish wouldn't rot, so the fish could last for a very long time. That's because the mysterious white rock had the magical ability to prevent rot. So one day, someone had this thought: what if we do the same thing to humans? So they started experimenting. They would remove internal organs from corpses, then cover them in these mysterious white rocks for weeks. Finally, the dried body would be wrapped in linen and placed in a tomb. To their surprise, this idea was a great success. The mysterious white rock could really prevent the dead from rotting. To me and you, this may seem normal, but to them, it was a big deal, because they thought bodies had to be intact for them to reach the afterlife. This mysterious white rock allowed them to live on in the next world. It was a divine gift from the gods. From then onwards, the ancient Egyptians associated the mysterious white rock with the afterlife and religion. Unlike the Chinese, who mainly used it for food preservation, the ancient Egyptians had unlocked a whole new world. This mysterious white rock was later given the name natron by the ancient Egyptians. But all good things come to an end. When future civilizations learned about salt, destruction spread. It became a banner of hope, a symbol of power, and a cue for war. An edible rock would become far more destructive than a nuclear bomb. Imagine for a moment. The howling winds, the creaking of wood. Outside, it was a swirling sea of white. Your breath fogged the air. You had just woken up on a straw mattress. Footsteps echoed as you walked out of the room. You saw your family, joy and laughter resounded. But that was just a hallucination. You came back to reality. Your kids were silent, not because they weren't hungry, but because they've grown used to being hungry. This is all because of those damn nobles. Just over the border, salt was nearly free, but here you were forced to buy 7 kilograms of salt every year at absurd prices, whether you needed it or not, whether you could afford it or not. But you were poor, how could you afford it? And even worse, if you tried to bring some from over the border, even just a handful, you're a criminal. Soldiers would drag you from your home and you would never be heard of again. All of this for what? At night, you'd go to sleep hungry and cold, while the nobles? Venison, salted meat, fine cheeses, warm beds, luxurious manners, they had everything. You had already lost all hope. Even the so-called servants of God, the clergymen, paid no heed. But right at this moment, in the village square, a voice echoed. They're gathering in Paris. They say the people will rise, that they'll tear down the walls of the Bastille. Life was hell as a peasant. They lived unfair and unjust lives. Why? Because of an edible rock. Salt was essential for life and easy to control. This made it a perfect way to control the masses. Hundreds of years, generations of families, they were suppressed by the Gabelle until they appeared. The voiceless started to rise. What gives someone the right to rule? Why are some born to suffer while others live in palaces? Is freedom worth the blood it costs? The king, nobles and clergy took everything from the common people. We cannot eat, yet they still ask for more. What is left to give? Our lives? So they decided to fight back. The storming of the Bastille, the abolishment of the feudal system. The people no longer had masters, no longer had chains. The main perpetrators, King Louis XVI and other nobles, were executed. But things began to spiral out of control. Radicals like Robespierre took over. Thousands were guillotined. Nobles, clergy, even their own men, the revolutionaries. The revolution devours its own children. Only until Napoleon took over was there a breath of fresh air. All of this, for what? An edible rock. The American Revolution, Gandhi's Salt March. All sorts of wars and rebellions happened over this edible rock, not just the French Revolution. And the total casualties amount to millions, more than what a single nuclear bomb could cause. But this makes things even weirder. Whether it's at the grocery store or in your home, there is salt. How could something so valuable be so common? The answer is something called the paradox of value, also known as the diamond water paradox. Why are diamonds so expensive even though they are practically useless, while water is so cheap even though it is essential? In The Wealth of Nations 1776, Adam Smith stated that nothing is more useful than water, but it will purchase scarce anything. A diamond, on the contrary, has scarcely any value in use, but a very great quantity of other goods may frequently be had in exchange for it. Basically, common things are cheap, rare things are expensive. If you have a job, you would have a salary. But did you know that the word salary actually comes from the Latin word salarium, which was the money given to Roman soldiers to buy salt? Salt was essential for survival. It could preserve food, heal wounds, and be used as medicine. This made it extremely valuable, so much so that people would go to extreme lengths to control it, like how the Gabelle in France eventually led to smuggling, corruption, and finally rebellion. But this begs the question, why is it so common and cheap now? So much so that it's sprinkled on roads to remove snow. The main perpetrator is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution introduced mechanized mining and brine extraction. This made salt abundant, cheap, and easy to produce. It no longer required risky sea boiling or back-breaking work from the underground mines. Salt, something once considered as precious as gold, is now almost worthless due to how accessible it is. But that doesn't mean salt is useless. We are still finding new ways of using salt even today. The possibilities are truly boundless. Currently, the batteries in your iPhone are lithium-based batteries. But lithium is not only expensive, it's also harmful to the environment. How to fix this problem? An edible rock. Salt is found everywhere. There's no need to mine remote or politically unstable regions. And companies like CATL in China and researchers in Europe are already producing working prototypes of salt-based batteries. But if you think the influence of salt is trapped within our planet, then you're in for a surprise. Researchers are currently testing this edible rock to regulate the temperatures in a spacecraft. That's because some salt mixtures can store and transfer heat efficiently. When we think of something that has changed the world, we often think of the smartphone, the steam engine, or maybe even democratic ideals. But sometimes the real game changer is something invisible, mundane even. Just like how salt has changed the world, if this video changed your perspective or if you learned something new, drop a like and subscribe, it really helps. See you in the next video.